The year is 2025. The war in Ukraine grinds on, a brutal testament to geopolitical ambition and human suffering. Yet, amidst the devastation, a glimmer of hope emerges. A proposed 30-day ceasefire offers a chance, however slim, for peace talks and a potential end to the bloodshed. This fragile hope, however, is immediately complicated by the conditions laid out by Russian President Vladimir Putin. His demands, shrouded in strategic ambiguity, have cast a long shadow over the ceasefire proposal, raising questions about his true intentions and the potential for a lasting peace. The world watches with bated breath as the fate of Ukraine hangs in the balance. The ceasefire, if implemented, would mark a significant turning point in the conflict, offering a much-needed respite from the violence that has ravaged the nation. It would also provide a crucial window for dialogue and diplomacy, potentially paving the way for a negotiated settlement. However, the success of the ceasefire hinges on the willingness of both sides to abide by its terms and to engage in good faith negotiations. Putin's conditions, however, threaten to derail the ceasefire before it even begins. They have been met with skepticism and condemnation from Ukraine and its Western allies, who view them as a cynical ploy to extract concessions and to solidify Russia's military gains. The conditions, if accepted, would severely restrict Ukraine's ability to defend itself, essentially forcing it to accept a disadvantageous peace. The international community is now faced with a stark choice: appease Putin in the hope of ending the bloodshed, or stand firm against his aggression and risk a protracted and even more devastating conflict. The stakes could not be higher. The decision made in the coming days will have profound implications for the future of Ukraine, for the security of Europe, and for the rules-based international order. Putin's conditions for the ceasefire are a carefully calculated gambit designed to advance Russia's strategic objectives while presenting a facade of reasonableness to the international community. They are a testament to his shrewd understanding of power politics and his willingness to exploit any opportunity to strengthen Russia's position. One of his key demands is a restriction on Ukraine's troop mobilization and arms imports during the ceasefire. This condition, if implemented, would severely hamper Ukraine's ability to defend itself should the fighting resume after the 30-day pause. It would effectively freeze the conflict in place, allowing Russia to consolidate its territorial gains and to prepare for a renewed offensive. Furthermore, Putin has reiterated his insistence on addressing the original causes of the war, a thinly veiled reference to his long-standing grievances against NATO expansion and Western influence in Eastern Europe. This demand, which falls far outside the scope of the ceasefire agreement, is a clear indication that Putin sees the conflict in Ukraine as part of a broader geopolitical struggle with the West. He is using the ceasefire as leverage to extract concessions on issues unrelated to the immediate conflict, attempting to reshape the European security architecture in Russia's favor. Putin's conditions are not merely about ending the war in Ukraine, they are about reasserting Russia's dominance in its near abroad and about rolling back the post-Cold War order. They are a clear message to the West. Russia is prepared to use military force to achieve its objectives and will not hesitate to exploit any perceived weakness. The international community must recognize these conditions for what they are: an attempt to legitimize aggression and to impose a Russian sphere of influence on Eastern Europe. Accepting them would set a dangerous precedent, emboldening authoritarian regimes around the world and undermining the rules-based international system. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has responded to Putin's ceasefire conditions with a mixture of defiance and apprehension. He has accused Putin of bad faith, arguing that the conditions are designed to sabotage the ceasefire and to give Russia a military advantage. Zelensky views Putin's overture not as a genuine offer of peace, but as a cynical ploy to buy time, to consolidate territorial gains, and to sow discord among Ukraine's Western allies. Zelensky's skepticism is understandable. He has witnessed firsthand the brutality of the Russian invasion and the Kremlin's willingness to violate international law and to disregard human life. He understands that Putin respects only strength and will exploit any sign of weakness. Accepting the ceasefire conditions in Zelensky's view would be tantamount to surrender, placing Ukraine at Russia's mercy. The Ukrainian president has called on the international community to see through Putin's deception and to maintain pressure on the Russian regime. He has urged continued military aid for Ukraine, arguing that only a strong and credible deterrent can bring Putin to the negotiating table in good faith. Zelensky's message is clear: Ukraine will not be bullied into submission. It will continue to fight for its freedom and sovereignty, even if it must do so alone. However, beneath Zelensky's defiant rhetoric lies a deep-seated anxiety. He knows that Ukraine cannot sustain a protracted war of attrition against a larger and more powerful adversary indefinitely. The human and economic costs of the conflict are already staggering, and the longer the war drags on, the greater the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Zelensky is caught in a tragic dilemma, forced to choose between accepting a peace that would leave his country vulnerable and continuing a fight that could ultimately lead to its destruction. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, who has remained a vocal figure in American politics, finds himself walking a tightrope between advocating for peace in Ukraine and appealing to his base of supporters, some of whom harbor pro-Russian sentiments. Trump has expressed a desire to broker a peace deal, going so far as to suggest potential concessions from Ukraine involving territory and other key demands from Russia. Trump's involvement, however, has been met with mixed reactions. Some see his willingness to engage with Putin as a potential breakthrough, believing that his unorthodox approach and direct line of communication with the Russian leader could yield results where traditional diplomacy has failed. They point to his past successes in negotiating with authoritarian figures like Kim Jong-un as evidence of his ability to strike deals that others deem impossible. However, critics view Trump's involvement with suspicion, concerned that his desire for a quick peace could lead him to pressure Ukraine into accepting a deal that would be deeply unfavorable and contrary to its long-term interests. They argue that Trump's transactional view of foreign policy and his tendency to prioritize personal relationships over strategic considerations make him ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of the conflict in Ukraine. Adding to the uncertainty is Trump's history of making contradictory statements about Putin and the war. While he has condemned the invasion, he has also praised Putin's leadership and questioned the wisdom of U.S. support for Ukraine. This inconsistency has led to confusion about his true stance on the conflict and his willingness to stand up to Russian aggression. Trump's involvement in the Ukraine crisis is a gamble, one that carries both risks and potential rewards. It remains to be seen whether his efforts will contribute to a peaceful resolution or further complicate an already volatile situation. Section 5. Shifting Sands of War. The Battle for Kursk and its implications. As the ceasefire hangs in the balance, the situation on the ground remains fluid and unpredictable. The battle for the Kursk region, a strategically important area that straddles the Russia-Ukraine border, has intensified in recent weeks, with both sides pouring troops and resources into the fight. The outcome of this battle could have significant implications for the course of the war, and the willingness of either side to negotiate a lasting peace. Russia has claimed significant advances in Kursk, asserting that it has regained control of key towns and villages previously held by Ukrainian forces. These claims, however, have been disputed by Ukraine and its Western allies, who accuse Russia of exaggerating its gains and of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure in an attempt to terrorize the local population. The fighting in Kursk is emblematic of the brutal nature of the war, a grinding conflict of attrition characterized by heavy artillery bombardments, drone strikes, and street-to-street combat. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties, and the civilian toll has been horrific, with thousands of innocent men, women, and children caught in the crossfire. The battle for Kursk highlights the high stakes of the conflict and the challenges of achieving a lasting peace. Even if a ceasefire is agreed upon, the underlying tensions and mistrust that have fueled the war will remain. Unless these issues are addressed, any peace will be fragile at best, vulnerable to renewed fighting and further bloodshed. Section 6. A dangerous game expert analysis of Putin's ceasefire conditions. Putin's ceasefire conditions have been met with deep skepticism and concern from international security experts, who view them as a calculated attempt to exploit the situation to Russia's advantage and to undermine Ukraine's long-term security. Analysts warn that accepting Putin's demands would reward his aggression, embolden him to make further demands, and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. Timothy Snyder, a renowned historian and professor at Yale University, has argued that Putin's ceasefire conditions are a trap designed to lull Ukraine into a false sense of security, while Russia regroups and prepares for a renewed offensive. Snyder warns that accepting these conditions would be a grave mistake, one that would have disastrous consequences for Ukraine and for the future of European security. Anne Applebaum, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and historian, has echoed these concerns, arguing that Putin's ceasefire offer is a cynical ploy to freeze the conflict in place, consolidate Russia's gains, and buy time to undermine Western support for Ukraine. Applebaum warns that if Putin is successful in dividing the West and weakening its resolve, it will embolden him to escalate the conflict further, potentially leading to a wider war in Europe. Stephen Levine, a veteran foreign correspondent and author, has described Putin's ceasefire conditions as a form of hybrid warfare, an attempt to achieve political objectives through non-military means. Levine argues that Putin is using the ceasefire offer as a propaganda tool, both domestically and internationally, to portray Russia as a peacemaker, while shifting the blame for the conflict onto Ukraine and its Western allies. These expert analyses underscore the high stakes of the current situation. The international community must be under no illusions about Putin's intentions. His ceasefire offer is not a genuine offer of peace, but a calculated gambit to advance Russia's strategic objectives. Section 7. The Geopolitical Chessboard, Wider Implications of the Stalemate. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine is not merely a regional crisis, it is a pivotal moment in the post-Cold War order, with far-reaching implications for the future of international relations and the balance of power in Europe and beyond. The conflict has exposed the fragility of the rules-based international system and the willingness of authoritarian regimes to use military force to achieve their objectives. The war has also highlighted the growing strategic rivalry between Russia and the West, a rivalry that is likely to intensify in the years to come. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has shattered any remaining illusions about the possibility of a cooperative relationship with Russia, pushing NATO to strengthen its eastern flank and to increase its military spending. The conflict has also had a profound impact on the global economy, disrupting supply chains, driving up energy prices, and contributing to rising inflation worldwide. The war has exacerbated existing tensions between the West and China, which has refused to condemn the invasion and has continued to provide economic and diplomatic support to Russia. The outcome of the conflict in Ukraine will have profound implications for the future of Europe. A Russian victory would embolden Putin to make further territorial demands, potentially leading to a wider war that could engulf the entire continent. Conversely, a Ukrainian victory, while unlikely in the short term, would deal a significant blow to Putin's regime and could potentially lead to a reordering of the European security architecture. The stakes could not be higher. The world is watching closely as the drama in Ukraine unfolds, aware that the decisions made in the coming days and weeks could have profound consequences for generations to come. Section 8. A Nation in Limbo. The Human Cost of a Protracted Conflict. Lost amidst the geopolitical maneuvering and the strategic calculations is the profound human cost of the conflict. The war in Ukraine is not merely a clash of armies or a battle for territory, it is a tragedy of immense proportions, one that has shattered countless lives and left an indelible scar on the soul of a nation. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes, forced to flee the fighting and to seek refuge in neighboring countries or in safer parts of the country. These refugees, many of whom are women and children, face an uncertain future, struggling to rebuild their lives in unfamiliar surroundings, grappling with trauma, and longing for the day they can return home. Those who have remained in Ukraine face daily dangers. The fighting has devastated cities and towns across the country, reducing once vibrant communities to rubble. Hospitals, schools, and other civilian infrastructure have been targeted, leaving the population without access to essential services. The war has created a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions, one that will require a sustained international effort to address. Beyond the immediate physical toll, the war has exacted a heavy psychological cost on the Ukrainian people. The constant threat of violence, the loss of loved ones, and the uncertainty of the future have left many traumatized and struggling to cope. The war has also deepened divisions within Ukrainian society as people grapple with the legacy of the conflict and the challenges of rebuilding their lives. The human cost of the war in Ukraine is impossible to quantify. It is a tragedy that will continue to unfold long after the guns have fallen silent. The international community must not forget the plight of the Ukrainian people. Their resilience and determination in the face of unimaginable adversity is an inspiration to us all. Section 9. The Path Forward. Towards a lasting peace in Ukraine. As the world holds its breath, grappling with the complexities of the proposed ceasefire and the potential pitfalls it presents, the question remains, is a lasting peace in Ukraine even attainable? The path forward is fraught with obstacles, a labyrinth of competing interests, deep-seated mistrust, and the ever-present threat of renewed violence. The success of any ceasefire hinges on the willingness of both sides to abide by its terms and to engage in good faith negotiations. However, given the current climate of suspicion and animosity, achieving such a delicate balance seems like a Herculean task. Putin's demands, seen by many as non-starters, cast a long shadow over the prospects of meaningful dialogue. Furthermore, even if a ceasefire holds, the underlying issues that led to the conflict remain unresolved. The status of the disputed territories, the question of Ukraine's neutrality, and the future of Russia's relationship with the West are all contentious issues that will require careful negotiation and compromise. Achieving a lasting peace in Ukraine will require a multifaceted approach, one that addresses both the immediate security concerns and the long-term drivers of the conflict. This includes unwavering support for Ukraine. The international community must continue to provide Ukraine with the military, economic, and humanitarian assistance it needs to defend itself and to rebuild its shattered economy. This support must be unwavering and sustained, sending a clear message to Putin that his aggression will not be tolerated. Maintaining pressure on Russia. The sanctions imposed on Russia must remain in place until it withdraws its forces from Ukraine and ceases its aggressive actions. The international community must also hold Russia accountable for war crimes and human rights abuses committed during the conflict. Addressing Russia's security concerns. While condemning Russia's aggression, it is also important to acknowledge and address its legitimate security concerns. This does not mean conceding to Putin's demands, but rather engaging in dialogue to find ways to rebuild trust and to create a more stable European security architecture. Supporting Ukraine's reconstruction. The international community must be prepared to provide substantial financial assistance to help Ukraine rebuild its infrastructure, economy, and society. This will require a long-term commitment and a coordinated effort from governments, international organizations, and the private sector. The path to peace in Ukraine will be long and arduous, but it is a path that must be taken. The alternative, a protracted conflict that further destabilizes Europe and risks escalating into a wider war, is simply unacceptable. The international community must summon the political will, the diplomatic skill, and the unwavering commitment to peace to navigate this treacherous terrain and to build a future where Ukraine can once again flourish as a sovereign and independent nation.